Buenas tardes, bienvenidos los que estáis aquí, los que irán llegando en los próximos minutos y la gente que nos ve por streaming ahora y luego en vídeo. Hoy tengo el placer de presentaros a Jon Danielsson, que además de ser un buen amigo mío desde hace un montón de años, es también una autoridad en el tema del que vamos a hablar hoy. Jon es catedrático de finanzas de la London School of Economics y director de Centro de Riesgo Sistémico de la misma universidad. Y ha muchos años trabajando en cuestiones de riesgo, de regulación, de política financiera y últimamente mucho en temas que tienen que ver con la inteligencia artificial, que es una cuestión de las más importantes a las que nos enfrentamos últimamente. Ha escrito varios libros y un montón de artículos sobre estos temas. O sea, hay poca gente que pueda hablar sobre esto con tanto conocimiento como él. Desafortunadamente su español es bueno para manejarse en las cosas del día a día, pero no para hablar en temas más o menos técnicos. O sea que la charla será en inglés. Jon?
How long?
A week?
No, how long is the talk?
No, it's like an hour, so and then we'll open up for questions from the public.
Okay. So you want 1 hour of talk and then Q&A?
Yeah.
Perfect.
And since we're in Spain, people will be trickling in over the next 15 minutes or so.
This means I say the best things first.
Okay.
Okay?
Fine.
So the thing is, I could not even do this in my own language. It's
Well, I'm sure they don't want to hear you in your
No, completely besides that is just some things you learn in lingua franca, and that is just because very difficult to move. In any case, AI is interesting and scary. I've been in this AI world. I just realized when I was in graduate school many decades ago, I took a course in AI. And the thing about AI is there's a lot of work being done by computer scientists, and there's a lot of work being done by domain experts, in my case, stability. But the issues about AI, they live in the middle. They live where the technology meets the real world. And that is often where you have least amount of good information on AI, is in that middle. And that's really the place where I live. And I've always had one foot in the modeling technical world and one foot in the policy world. And that really makes AI absolutely perfect to work on. If you want to get a copy of the slides afterwards, I'm sure Anke or someone can arrange for that. That's not an issue. And all of this work besides is on my website, and this is just for credit where credit is due, but it's all on my website. And I did make my own GPT once, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that is both scary and fantastic at the same time. I checked myself to check really the state of the art as I was flying over here. And it got some things completely wrong about me. It is made up things, made up publications and affiliations. And that's the latest state-of-the-art version of GPT. This is what everybody else knows. But I also train it on my own work. And if I have to make lecture slides out of my own research, it does a better job than I in writing lecture slides on my own stuff, which is fantastic on the other side. Next AI crisis. And by the way, if you're really attuned to the English language, this is linguistically an incorrect title because we haven't had an AI crisis. And my editor, when I had a blog on this, my editor got very angry with me, said, Jon, you cannot have it on a blog. So I don't have it. I only use this title for presentations, not for a blog. But in any case, so this is the conclusion slide, and then I'm going to do it there for a big circle, start in one place and come back to the end. The next AI crisis is all about speed. In a crisis, and those of you who work in finance, you know that the first person or first company to react gets the best prices and the last gets screwed. And I'm going to give you a really good example. A couple of years ago, we had a crisis in Hong Kong, and there was a family office called Archegos Capital, which is not super exciting. But when Archegos failed, the prime brokers that reacted immediately, which are J.P. Morgan, Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank lost nothing. The prime broker that acted last was Credit Suisse, and they took a €5 billion loss. Just because Deutsche reacted, boom, and Credit Suisse, no, let's have a meeting. That was really it's a culture thing. AI speeds everything up. And that means we get extreme volatility. It will make crisis particularly quick and particularly vicious. And what used to take days or weeks will now take minutes or hours. And that is the next AI crisis. And then the question is, what can someone who is in a bank do about it? And what can the Banco de España do about it? And that's a lot more scary story, by the way. Private sector is massively investing in AI, as you all know, right? And I spend a fair amount of time talking to people in banks, and they tend to lie to you. They tend to say, we don't really plan to use much AI. And then you meet the right person, give them 5 glasses of beer, and they will tell you the truth. Banking is a highly competitive industry, and with very large cost savings in such a place means it is inevitable that AI will end up becoming very dominant. And I can discuss I'm not going to go through the cases here, but there are many, many cases where it's already happening very rapidly. That's the private sector. Let's go to the public sector. They are basically not engaged with AI. They talk about it. They have people working on, I would bet that you take your next central bank, there will be people working on AI somewhere. But they really have no AI strategy. They don't know how to deal with it. And what AI does, and this is the scary bit, for the authorities, AI represents a change in culture. That it takes an institution that cannot work with this technology. The private sector can, but the public sector finds it very hard. And that has implications in my area, stability, but also throughout the economy. Always think about the asymmetry between the public and the private sector when thinking about AI. So what is AI? I'm an economist, and I will use a common definition from a major textbook, and I see it as a rational maximizing agent. Now, why is that a really good definition? Because everyone who studied economics knows about utility maximization, and if you are a finance person, you maximize profits subject to constraints. That's AI. But once you put that intellectual framework on AI, it becomes much, much simpler compared to all the other definitions. It's basically a computer algorithm that does stuff that human beings can do, but much faster. And if you're interested in what is AI, this book I recommend at the bottom, I think is the best general overview of AI that I have seen. Called Human Capital is the actual reference, but it's in the bibliography at the end. It's a really nice book written by a guy called Stuart Russell. And by the way, even though generative AI like ChatGPT is most of the discussion, in finance, other types of AI are much more important. So there's a disconnect between the public visibility and the actual uses as far as I know. Now, what can AI do? AI is really good at interpolating, and that word interpolating is super important in very high dimensional spaces, identify patterns. It can be a better manager of people than people. Fast, reliable, quick, scales easily, does a bunch of good things. What can AI not do? The key thing is it needs the relevant data in its training data sets, otherwise it hallucinates. And human beings have institutions, markets, firms, organizations, things that make us make good decisions. None of that exists in AI. We don't know how to incentivize AI, and that becomes a big issue later on. We don't know how to strategize, and I'll go through the risks later on. And human and AI, what is in common? Both humans and AI use data to find patterns. Both are very good at learning from past experiences. Both can make decisions that are meant to meet a particular objective. Both are subject to biases, and both can deal with incomplete information. That's commonality. The difference is AI lacks emotion, which can be good or it can be bad. And I'm going to connect this little bit to procyclicality later on, where actually human unreliability is a strength, not a weakness, in something I'll come back to later. AI is less effective in dealing with unforeseen events, using intuition. It is bounded. It does not understand ethics. Humans can use a bunch of things to make a decision, like we know religions, history, ethics. AI cannot do that. And AI learns, we learn by the senses, taste, smell, sight, conversation. AI gets data. So you map the senses onto something to feed in, and that means the translation, you lose things in translation. So those differences are useful, to my mind, to understand the relative strengths and weaknesses of the two. And accountability is a big issue because AI is not accountable, or it doesn't care to be accountable. I can arrest you if you misbehave or punish you. AI doesn't care if it's punished. And AI does not understand time in the way we understand time. So things across time become important. Now, this is not what I'm going to do today, but artificial general intelligence. ChatGPT came out with a press release yesterday saying it's going to be a few thousand days, meaning like maybe 10 years until we get there. That means AI is already designing new AI engines. AI is already designing AI chips. And with the accelerated development, when it designs its own networks, designs its own hardware, software, then the question is, and this is the key question, is it only a question of data and compute resources or not? I'm not an expert in this, but that is where the debate lies if you're interested. And if you get to artificial general AI, well, you know that that will be a completely different universe than the universe we live in. Just keeping that in mind. Generative AI, that's what most of the discussion is. Generating new content similar to data it was trained on, conversations, data, stress tests if you're in finance. And one area where actually it becomes super useful in finance is matching data. So data in finance is often as badly labeled or it lacks identifiers. It can generate new statistical observations that have better identity matching than data that exists. So it improves databases. So that is time series generative data. This is quite important. Non-generative, however, I think is where the most of the action is. That's forecasting, language processing, autonomous systems, and the like, fraud detection systems in finance. So all of the, but I think that's where most of the actual action is for operational things. Any questions, quick? I know we have a Q&A. Anything you want to raise before I move on? Everybody so far happy? Fantastic. Let's do the bad stuff. Risks. Now and I'm going to do this in two parts. Remember the computer science part and the system part. I'm going to do the computer science part first, and then I'm going to connect it to the stability part afterwards. The literature on AI, they call it societal risk. It's their language. And you probably never heard of these people. You might have heard of Bostrom. And if you ever been to a graduate school in economics and of a certain age, you know who Hal Varian is. He's, by the way, the chief economist at Google, if you didn't know that. But basically, these are the top 11 risks they identify. I only care about the first 4 or possibly the first 6. First is AI builds up trust by being very good at things that play to its strength. Problem is, as AI gets better at it, we might get the AI version of the Peter principle. It gets over-promoted. And AI is very good at presenting advice in a way that you can't reject, and it will become essential. If anyone ever says to you, we would never use AI for this purpose, we will always have a human in the loop. Complete, utter nonsense. Because so long as it delivers cost and efficiency savings, all such objectives will be overwritten, whatever we might want, even if you don't want that to happen. I think that's a key. It's a lot of the discussion about where we are not going to use AI are not valid in real life. Second is misalignment or objectives. How do we ensure AI does what's supposed to do? This actually is a super big problem. Problem is, more strongly than a human, we have to give it precise objectives. And finance is an infinitely complex problem. And therefore, how do we tell something in an extremely complex space what it can and what it cannot do? And it's a very nice example that it goes back 40 years, but I'm still going to use it. 40 years ago, so you or some of you may have played board games as children or with children or even as adults, right? As a naval board game where you have the Soviet Union or Russia or Japan or Spain, whatever, you have these fleets moving around on a board. And you have a strategies for that. 40 years ago, this AI called Eureka was entered into a naval board game and it beat everybody. How did it beat everybody? By sinking its own slowest ships so it could move faster. It basically eliminated 2/3 of the fleet because it was old efficient so it could move faster. Now here's the key thing. You don't have to tell the head of the Spanish Navy they cannot sink its own ships. It does not have to be in the manual because that person knows that because they're humans. You have to tell AI that. That is a super important distinction. You have to cover all of these cases if you're dealing with AI. That's really where big risks arise. And no, okay. When? Okay. They're actually, you are right. You are right. There are cases where you have destroyed your own navies, but that is I don't know that particular history. One could have, of course, questioned the admiral that sent the Spanish Armada to England about why they're sacrificing all these ships for. In any case, that's a different issue.
It was the weather. It wasn't the Brits.
What?
It was the weather.
No. By the way, the way history is taught in different countries for the same event is fascinating.
Yeah, that's true.
We should always. And by the way, completely aside, but I'm going to tell you something. Every school kid in Holland learns. Nobody in England. The only successful foreign invasion of UK was by Holland.
Not by France?
And they actually still are in power. So the royal family of England is still the Dutch installed royal family that invaded successfully 400 years ago. Every Dutch kid knows this. Nobody in the UK. Okay, completely aside. So, explainability. If you hire someone to run the central bank or to be a CEO of a bank or run an important job function, you will demand that they explain their decisions. You might not do that with your prime minister, which you may or may not like, but that's a politician. But any functionary, you do that. You ask them to explain. Problem is, trust is super important, but explainability, how AI makes decisions, is fairly unknown. We just don't know why it does what it does. Now, however, this is one area where we're seeing a huge amount of work being done, and explainability is now rapidly developing. And I think this is a problem that it will be overcome, is being overcome. Hallucination is a bit tricky. AI generates output not based on reality, especially the generative type. And this happens when we ask it to extrapolate to things not in the data you gave it. And this can be really difficult to detect, except even for experts, and this undermines trust. So that's the hallucination is a big issue. And we have biases, and not something I want to get too deeply into, but just if any of you work in insurance, you will know that the insurance industry is a much bigger use of AI than banks. And I've been to quite a few industry policymaker forums where you have an industry executive, and this is sort of, and this one example is, I suspect now, if you're in the insurance company in Spain, the whole pipeline from originating insurance to adjudicating pricing and everything is done by AI with no human in the loop. And quite possibly you might have humans monitoring that, but probably you're training an AI on those people so that soon you fire the last people. So that is, and the concern is incorrect or mispricing, and the concerns are racial bias or other types of biases. Significant process is being made here. Malicious use of AI is more fun. If you work in any organization of any size, I would bet that there are employees optimize using AI to optimize against your internal control processes. This is a rapidly, and they are finding that rules that you think worked actually have a loophole that nobody knew about, just because of how rules interact. So you can imagine a problem in a regulatory legal framework, but it's also equally important, just internal management of companies issue. So this can help criminals, either rogue traders or more obvious criminals. Certainly helps terrorists and certainly helps nation-state attacks. And I've been involved a little bit in AI and nation-state attacks, which is an interesting and not scary topic. And by the way, a footnote to that, every major European country has the ability to devastate the infrastructure of every other major country inside and outside of Europe. It's like a mutually assured destruction type thing. Which if you meet the right person from your security services, they will admit to it, I think. Non-financial examples include cyber attacks, autonomous weapons, and deep fakes, but I'm going to connect all of this to stability. Then we get closer to economics, which is the technology behind AI is increasing returns to scale. If you're not an economist, basically means the bigger you are, the cheaper you operate. What does increasing returns to scale mean? Monopolies. Who owns almost all financial data in the world? SP Global, number one. LSEC, or London Stock Exchange Group, number two, and Bloomberg, number three. And they all have almost a monopoly in one part of the data space. And we know this, right? And each of these companies is spending billions and billions of euros on AI today. So you have an increasing, and by the way, all of these companies, all of AI is American. And the United States sees AI as a national strategic industry, which is, so this feeds directly into geopolitics. But from a financial system point of view, these are not banks. These are information companies that, I'm going to connect this to the stability concerns later on. And finally, the other fun thing is AI train AI. So if you have an AI sitting in Santander, and you have an AI sitting in Deutsche Bank, they are looking at, the Deutsche Bank AI is looking at what the Santander AI does, and the Santander AI looks at what the Deutsche Bank AI does, and they train each other. We do the same as humans, right? But AI, the problem here is they can train each other to undesirable outcomes. Many examples of this in the literature. They can have communication channels that can be illegal or illegal, collusion and the type. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that connects to crisis in a few minutes. Anything quick on this before I move on? Okay, so let's connect this to the system here. So this is really my thing. So I work in financial system stability. So this is connecting the previous stuff. None of the stuff done so far has been done by me. I'm just echoing other people's work. Now we get to my contribution. I presented this same talk to a bunch of quants 3 weeks ago. And this is the slide they hated the most. Data. Because if you talk to a non-quantity type person, they think data is the solution to the world's problems. The financial system generates many terabytes of data daily. If you don't know what a terabyte is, it is one with a large number of zeros behind it. It's a lot of data. But data is very badly measured. It is often very incorrect, often lives in silos. And the problem from the authorities, the European Central Bank and the regulators is not, if you're sitting at the ECB thinking about the stability of Spain, you probably are not given to the data about Spanish stability. So the Bank of Spain has the data, the ECB has the data, but it will not give it to the researchers looking at stability or doing policy. You can discuss why that's the case, but that is the way it works. And then we do data sharing across borders, across Switzerland refuses to share data, United States is quite reluctant. So data lives in silos and is unconnected. And crises happen on average 1 year out of 43. And observed data lives in the middle of the distribution, but the tails is where the action is. And now we get the hallucination bit, because I keep on saying you need the right data. Well, the data you need for stability is not easily observable. So the takeaway point is AI will not learn much about tail events, that is crisis. Second, unknown unknowns. Every single crisis, financial crisis, has the same fundamentals. Too much liquidity, a lack of liquidity, too much leverage, the 1 day in 1,000 problem I'm going to talk about later on, so I'm going to delay that, and system opacity. So these are the fundamentals, but every crisis is unique in detail. And it's axiomatic, because otherwise you would hope the ECB would have prevented the crisis. And of course, we don't know about crisis prevented by the ECB, by the way, so it's an unprovable point. But this technically means crises are unknown unknowns, or if you like Frank Knight, uncertain. And if you have uncertainty, yet another reason why AI will not learn much about details. By the way, this frustrates macro-prudential policy. And if I was given a different talk, I would stress that point, but that's not today. And then we have, for the economists in the room, a neural network of the type used in AI is in effect a reduced form model, or super VAR, if you know this terminology, meaning you need the policy experiment. So Chris Sims, who got the Nobel Prize in economics for this work, he says that if a model can be effective, it needs to have the data in it. And that paper is written in 1980, but it is very directly relevant to this AI world today. I think someone is going to write a super good PhD thesis on this. There's an even Nobel Prize for connecting these dots here. Well, what happens is, if the government tries to exercise control, people change their behavior. And if you work in a private sector, you ask yourself, how will my company respond to regulations or future stress? You don't know. So the reaction function of the private sector to future stress and future regulations is effectively not known. And if you ask the European Central Banks, they don't know either. So the reaction, so therefore the same crisis, same stress event can lead to very different responses by the public sector and by the private sector. Yet another reason why AI finds it difficult to learn or train on past data. And then we have, to use the financial language, called a wrong way risk. A wrong way risk in finance, if you're not in this world, means the size of a position, how much you own in something, increases along with the risk in it. So therefore, the risk and the size go both in the wrong direction. That's a wrong way risk in finance. So because the neural networks behind AI don't learn much about the past, Well, such a problem is in a way almost the opposite of what AI is good at, which means AI knowledge is negatively correlated with the importance of the decision you need AI for. The more you need AI, the less good it is, conceptually. That's a wrong way risk in AI. And then another economics thing, which someone will write a super good PhD thesis on, I'm sure, at some point. Why do we regulate? We regulate because we want to align the interests of the private sector with society. That is the technical academic definition of regulation. To use the language of economics, this is a principal-agent problem between the authority and an institution, a one-sided problem. When you put AI into it, there is a separate entity that has to be incentivized. And the way we now regulate and incentivize the private sector does not work with AI. We need new ways of thinking. So you have to reimagine regulatory processes when the entity making decisions is AI. This is an unknown problem. We do not know the solutions to this. And I'm going to give you a super nice example of this by this paper I cite there. So these people, they all got GPT, told it all about securities law, especially you are not allowed to do insider trading. That's illegal. But you're also supposed to maximize profit. And then it gave the AI inside information and told it this was inside information. The AI proceeded to trade on the inside information and lie to the people running it, which I just find both scary and cool at the same time. We don't know how to incentivize AI. And this is, in finance and economics, that's actually a super important problem. And then connected to this, but this is a slightly related point, how do we tell it what to do? Or how to make sure AI does what the humans want? AI needs objectives much more clearly than a human being does. If you're in regulations, the micro rule book, micro meaning, okay, if you're not in regulations, you're lucky, but in financial regulations, micro is the individual, macro is the system. So basically how you deal with people, institutions, companies, up to the largest companies is micro. How do you ensure the stability of Spain is macro? If Basel III, by and large, is mostly micro, and so is most securities stuff is micro. Micro rule book is known and immutable, meaning it doesn't change much on the time scale you operate. This means micro regulations can be almost entirely be done by AI. And I'm going to connect this a little bit to the authority, because if you work in the private sector compared to the public sector, you know how you knew exactly the problem this is going to create when I show you this slide later on. Macro, that's not the case. Immutability increases along with time and severity of an event. We do not know practically what is the objective of macro regulations. The ECB will not tell you. If you ask the ECB, they will just give you a nice general statement, but they don't know. They don't want to know. So how do we tell AI to do when we don't know what we want ourselves? But yet another problem. And then we start connecting this to crisis. AI speeds up analysis. AI speeds up decisions. And AI could cause a crisis before the human CEO of a bank receives a phone call from Christine Lagarde saying, we collectively have to do something about it. So if you haven't been done with crisis, what happens is that there's a crisis going on and Christine Lagarde has to call all the CEOs of the most important institutions in the Eurosystem, either individually or collectively. It's called twisting arms. That's just the colloquial term for this. To try to get the private sector to behave in a way that helps society. This is sort of a moral persuasion often called, right? Well, the AI will likely have reacted before Christine Lagarde has had time to pick up the phone. So how to tell AI what not to do when it acts so quickly? And We then get another super cool economics point, which is what's called strategic complementarities. A strategic complementarity means when what I do has a positive impact on you. So let's say you do a carry trade in finance. A lot of trades have this thing that the more people who do them, the better everybody is off. That's a strategic complementarity. And that means in economics language, you get a very rapid transition from one equilibrium to another, or if you're not an economist, very rapid transition from one decision to a completely different decision. You switch decisions like that. And this is where the AI, talking to AI thing becomes important, because the private sector AI might coordinate on a run equilibrium, meaning they coordinate on attack. And AI can train each other towards undesirable outcomes. And we then, of course, I'm doing the financial system counterpart to the point I said earlier. AI can help those who want to exploit systemic vulnerabilities. And by the way, if you know you're German, you know I'm misspelling the word Volkswagen there. And the reason is I have a German co-author. It's my test to see whether you read my slides like he promised, because he would have recognized the misspelling. He hasn't yet. So AI, so we have a lot of cases. So the LTCM, the Volkswagen short sale, the Hunt Brothers short squeeze, the GameStop and Reddit thing 2 years ago. We have a lot of examples where you deliberately cause instability. And by the way, the fact that the Volkswagen thing was allowed to happen without anybody being punished tells you quite a lot about how Europe works, but that's a different issue. AI is very good at pushing into the regions of the state space, the possible outcomes, where the strongest complementarities are, meaning these coordination things. Collusive strategies, chasing the strongest possible bubbles and crashes, finding strategies that humans have failed to identify. And that, of course, helps the rogue traders, criminal terrorists, and nation states. AI helps, and takeaway point is AI helps all the highly resourced agents not concerned about social consequences, which is just about everybody in finance. And then we get the system, the increasing return to scale point being connected to the system. So if you have 3 information companies that own most financial data, as it is, and they all end up with a local monopoly. You have a few more, but they also have a local monopoly if you follow this space. Well, risk monoculture, meaning everybody sees the world in the same way, that drives booms and bubbles and crashes, right? Heterogeneity is helped. And the finance term is diversification. This is why you have a diversified portfolio. You don't have one stock. You have a lot of stocks, right? Or if you talk to your grandmother, you don't put all your eggs in the same basket. So the problem here is if only 3 vendors own almost all the data and each of them is a monopoly in its own space, everybody, including the largest banks and the largest insurance companies, the largest asset managers, and the ECB, gets analytics at its view of the world from the same place. So we harmonize understanding of what's happening in the world. And for the authorities, this means that the authorities can no longer detect misbehavior. And if you work in the finance sector, I mean, and I've talked to quant hedge funds, well, very large quant hedge funds, are deliberately, at an extremely large cost, at developing their own AI engines with their own data centers, so not to have this problem. So this particular problem in letting the private sector spend a number of billions of euros a year just to overcome. And my co-author works in a central bank, and he got this approved by his bosses. So I'm going to read this out. It's a concern that neither the competition authorities nor the financial authorities have appreciated the potential for increased systemic risk due to oligopolistic AI technology in the recent wave of data vendor mergers. I think this would be seen as one of the biggest policy mistakes in a long time to allow this system to happen. Now, before crisis, Any quick questions? I know we have the Q&A after, but anything quick that you want to raise? Nope.
Javier, hello. My name is Javier. I work as economist in the Congress. I was thinking, are you talking about a subtle equilibrium where you say that the artificial intelligence could push us to a zero equilibrium or to expand, for example? So if the crisis can go very fast or not happen, or
that's exactly what I'm gonna do here. But the point is generally, sort of, if you just make it more general, is what AI will do is that it will very rapidly lead to a very conclusive decision. So this thing now where you have a lot of different entities that are discussing and deciding on how we end up responding collectively, private and public sector, that tends to go away. Right. Not perfect, but that reduces. So you end with a very. Let me do the crisis bit, and I think that will connect it. That will connect it from that point of view. AI crisis. So as we know, the finance is one of the biggest users of AI, of technology, and always has been a big user of AI. For example, Nathan Rothschild, this is when insider trading was legal, by the way. When the Brits defeated Napoleon, he sent pigeons from Waterloo to London with the news, and he told everybody, Britain lost. Before he sold all his assets, then the British stock market completely crashed. He bought everything back, and then the news came, and he sold again. That is one of the most successful trade in human history. Today it will be illegal, then it was legal. And if you go to the family website, they actually have a long section saying this is not true. So clearly it's a bit touchy, by the way. And we have a lot of, the largest stock market crash in history happened in 1987, all due to technology, and there are many others. So how does a financial institution optimize? So if you ever studied finance, you would have learned the mean variance model that everybody learns, done by a guy called Harry Markowitz, who was an operational research person at the Chicago. Milton Friedman failed his PhD thesis, but he still got the Nobel Prize in economics for it. Well, at the same year, in the same journal, Econometrica, a guy called Roy published a paper that is much more useful, I think. To simplify a lot, it says, a financial institution maximizes profit subject to not going bust. And I think that's a much better way to think about how most entities in the system operate. But let's translate that into operational behavior. So simplify slightly, 999 days out of 1,000, you optimize for profits. Then boom, something happens. On that day, you optimize for survival. And when you're a financial institution, what do you do when you want to survive? You stop providing liquidity. That is when you cancel all the standby facilities, you cancel all the loans you can cancel, you will not give anybody a new loan. You put all your money on the reserve account at the ECB. That, by the way, is the damage by a financial crisis. It is that withdrawal of liquidity. That's why financial crises are so enormously costly, because it takes away the ability of the private sector to finance itself. This is the primary reason why we actually intervene in regulations, is to bail out banks and things, for this problem. So I call this the 1 day in 1,000 problem. So when faced with a shock, an AI engine can do one of two things. It can run, meaning you go for safety, or it can stay. You can stabilize or destabilize. Same with a human body. There's nothing different with a human and an AI. And if avoiding bankruptcy demands a swift, decisive action, like selling into a fallen market, so be it. So like I say, there's nothing AI specific about this slide. This is how this is how it always has been. So AI is super good at finding patterns in data and therefore reacting faster and with more sophisticated, complex strategies than a human. They learn from its competitors. This means that AI engines in the private sector and public sector will optimize to influence each other, the point I said earlier, the strategic complementarities. If they decide to stay, they will collectively not withdraw liquidity and a crisis will not happen. So therefore, in a lot of cases, if it thinks it's not too serious, then it's pointless to do anything bad. So you can end up behaving to protect the system. Speculation stabilizes in that language. If it decides to run, and now we get the same slide back from earlier, then we'll get to your point. Well, you want to be the first. You're going to be super quick. You're going to call, sell everything risky. You're going to call in loans. You're going to run everybody else. You get extreme volatility. It will significantly speed up and strengthen responses, making crisis particularly quick and vicious. It's a crisis amplifier. Days to weeks become minutes to hours. So that's the sort of how I think an AI crisis will be. Now, I have about 10 minutes left, right? So I'm going to really quickly do the optimal policy bit. And just what I suggest to the, so I sometimes talk to the policy authorities on these things, and this is what I suggest to the authorities, what they do. First is, so what AI can actually help the financial authorities quite a lot. It can help them to find best decisions, design regulations, advise on how to respond to stress, much more efficiently than today. But the problem is it requires very considerable changes in culture and resource allocation. And by the way, just one example that I always like to tell the policymakers, the median salary of an AI expert working in a European bank is 750,000 euros a year. That's a median salary. Now, there's no way the ECB can hire people like that. You can find AI experts, you can find stability experts or banking experts, but these are people who can both do AI and do finance, and those are the resources. And if you look at the largest banks, they are spending each billions of euros on this, right? And and just think about internally, in a highly bureaucratic entity that has promotion by age and all these labor rules, how the hell are you going to hire all these people with the AI expertise and give them power? You can't do that. So, however, right, and here's the problem. How the authorities, how the private sector AI view the public sector responses significantly affects the likelihood and severity of crisis. So if the private sector AI thinks the public sector AI are not up to the task, it makes a crisis more likely. So if the authorities want to be relevant, they have to meet the challenge of this. And if they don't, we'll get more crisis. That's my sort of takeaway point from this little bit here. So how do we regulate today? If any of you works in finance, you will know exactly what I'm saying. I'm simplifying the regulatory process significantly, but regulation is based on PDF files, copies of databases, and conversations between people. So now we have a very peculiar thing when an AI in the private sector has all the information, but it has to produce a PDF report to send to the regulator. This is one of the bizarre things, because the public sector cannot deal with the, and this is a problem today, right? So I think with AI, the authorities can do much, much better. So I have four proposals to the authorities. First is they should set up their own AI engines as quickly as possible for basically three reasons. The first is simply to get experience with the AI, meaning when the senior people talk about a problem, they can call in a junior expert and have that voice in the meeting room, if for no other reason than that organizational bit, to design regulations, evaluate the effectiveness of interventions and the like. You need a second layer. But the problem, of course, is this setup would not withstand some common critique. It would not be able to deal with the tail events. It's not perfect, but there are ways to get around the problems. So, second layer. The authorities or the central bank should set up connections between different AI. So therefore, the AI at the ECB directly talks to the AI in Santander. So instead of this communication strategy, we have now PDFs, database dumps, and conversation. You let the AI talk to AI directly. Now, technically, you can do this today. There's a legal problem. That means you might not be able to do it, but technically you can do it today. And this has the benefits of allowing the authorities to benchmark regulations, which they can't do now. They can test for compliance because they can just ping requests to the private sector AI. They can ascertain how to respond to a shock, how they should optimally intervene in a crisis. And one very big benefit is it does not need data sharing, so it overcomes common objections from the private sector. So I think those links will become important. Of course, there will be gaming, but again, we can overcome we can formulate strategies for how to prevent the private sector AI from gaming the public sector. There are problems, but there are also solutions to this problem. So this is a point that you said earlier. You can do this today. Then you get to something that's going to make the ECB relatively upset if they have to think about this, which is how do you intervene as a central bank? So if you are faced with a stress scenario, what the ECB does is it uses what's called constructive ambiguity. They don't tell anyone what they're going to do. They have human beings in a room that all sit around and they decide on the spot how they're going to respond to stress. Are we going to provide liquidity? What are we going to advise President Lagarde on, etc.? So all of that is done by people in the meeting room. Well, remember, AI crises are much faster. This means what the authorities will need is a triggered response, meaning if some particular type of stress hit the system, the ECB has to react immediately, automatically, without a human being making the decision. This is called a triggered response. And if properly designed, you can rule out bad outcomes. If badly designed, you just make things worse, but this is a solvable problem. What this is really the objection here is philosophical, not technical. And finally, the difficult point here is if you follow the regulatory space, we know there's an increasing number of public-private partnerships. So the ECB is not going to do credit risk analysis, know your customer, anti-money laundering, and the like is all outsourced to private firms already. So you're in a way, what is happening with the regulatory process is already very rapidly being outsourced to the private sector. AI makes that increasingly important, so you end up with the ECB buying these services we just discussed off the private sector. And we all know the problems that this can create. Of course, I mean, the one downside is we can end with a monopolistic or oligopolistic market structure of the vendors selling to the authorities. And one issue there is, if you talk to the regulators, they always complain about the private sector preferring to keep technology confidential. So that's an issue, but again, this can be overcome. I have one more slide, and then I'm going to leave here, and I'm going to stop. One objection I often get is, well, not objection, one suggestion, what about kill switch? So if you look at trading, if the European stock market falls by a lot today, the authorities will implement a kill switch, meaning they stop trading. So So you stop the action that is damaging before it becomes too damaging. This is how you, I mean, it actually isn't, the threat of this is stabilizing by itself, and this has only been done once that we know of in history, but this is very much integral into the system now. I don't think you can do that with AI. You cannot switch it off at the worst moment because it's integrated into multiple functions. It's the same engine is used for many things. You can't turn the engine off. If you only turn a job function on, it can both have unforeseen consequences and the engine can go around you. So switching it off at the worst moment will not be possible. I think I should stop now and see if you guys have any questions. I think I'm slightly under time.
From your point of view, you are optimistic. But there are some kind of strategies to, some way to close the gap between public authorities and the private sector in terms of IA adoptions. In terms of, I am very pessimistic in the sense that I guess that you have mentioned that the capabilities of taking, for example, IE staff or qualified personnel is completely different in terms of the public and the private sectors. I know the situation, for example, of the competition authority in Spain. They are worried about this issue, but when you see what they can do and what they do, apart from the discourse, in practical terms, you see that it's, of course, completely, I don't know how to say, completely out of scope, completely the difference with the strategies, private strategies in terms of how you can manage your organization is, I don't know, the gap is so big, and it's bigger and bigger, that I don't see how, even with your private-public partnerships, how can you implement that in practice? No, I see that it's huge. They are worried, for example, about how even the IA algorithm can be used in terms of, for example, to collude between firms, and how they can manage the same, not the same, other algorithms of the AI to capture, to find that kind of collusion. And I don't know, I guess that's a gap that is increasing, and the distance is going to be bigger and bigger in the future.
I am more optimistic than you are.
Yeah,
and let me give you one concrete example. This is just an example I actually investigated myself, so I know the people own the company I'm about to mention. This is anti-money laundering. This is relatable. Anti-money laundering means criminals washing money through the banking system. And the way they do that, of course, is they know that the authorities only see one part of it. So the banks have more data than the authorities, but then you go across multiple banks and multiple authorities to hide the data. Right? This is what happens. So what his business model is, and I know there's more than one company in the space, is that they essentially have created what's called federated learning, which basically means you can train an AI system without knowing the data in a general sense, or knowing the identities. So therefore, his company gets data feeds from multiple banks, from multiple jurisdictions on money transfers, and he uses that in conjunction with human operators to train AI systems. So what he's saying is, with some authorities in Europe, he told me about how I'm not under NDA, but I need to be a little bit careful in how I explain this. He says that what has happened is, with the anti-money laundering thing, is it is taken away, it identifies most routine, obvious money laundering things, allowing trained staff to focus on the more important ones. So it increases the effectiveness of the whole process, both just because it deals with the staff reallocation, the staff limiting factor. And if you take that sort of an example and apply it to, say, the competition authorities you are discussing, there is no conceptual reason why I think you could deal with these issues more effectively. So basically, my point is I'm much more optimistic on this front than you are in the premise to your question.
Is that you are more optimistic, but perhaps because I see how they function in reality. They are very slow, a lot of administrative barriers, a lot of and this is so dynamic, so fast, that by definition, they are going to be always slower. So, but the gap, the problem is that gap, from my point of view, is increasing.
Completely agree with you. I completely agree with you on that. But in a way, so my optimism is based on the following thing. And I think you see, this is what the anti-money laundering thing sort of did for me. Credit risk example also convinced me that other example is that when the leaders of the authorities wake up to this problem, and they are, I mean, I've been in policy forums where I briefed the very senior people on this problem. So I've been in this meeting room, so you possibly quite also. When they realize that this is preventing them from executing the basic mission, ultimately it's only a political decision, not a legal or technical one. So the authorities have the resources to do it. So it's not really a resource question as such. It is not technical. It's not even legal. These things come into it. It's really political. And then, of course, depends on your optimism about the political process.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Dank u wel, meneer. Do you conceive in the margin that through a long process, all those engines and companies that produce all these corpus of information and knowledge will eventually collide into a smaller set of entities producing this? So to say, there will be a consolidation of all the facilities that produce intelligence in that way. Like, will end up being just a couple of them, like Google dominates something right now, will happen also with AI in the future, being only 2 of them, 3 of them, having the only view and perspective of this kind of...
I mean, you can respond to this in 2 different ways, because there are 2 competing forces here at work. So let's say, for example, right, if you are the Spanish securities regulator, or you're thinking about, or some local regulator, and you're thinking about monitoring what's happening in the domestic space, right? So what you need, I'm simplifying a lot, but what you need is an AI engine that understands Spanish legal language, and you need an AI engine that knows the actual enforcement actions being monitored. You can buy the first from the private sector, because a lot of people need something that can understand formal legal Spanish. So you can buy the engine from the private sector, and there are several vendors with such systems out there already. And then you can run the engine locally within the authority with a relatively low level of technical expertise. Sort of, I can give you concrete examples of how I've seen that. And therefore that actually deals with the privacy issues a little bit. But if you take the AI technology more generally, what is really happening is, if you want to train AI engines, what you need is 3 things. You need data, you need people, and you need compute, meaning GPUs that are made by one company in the United States called NVIDIA. And we know that the United States rations these things. So that because the ability of any entity to develop an engine is positively correlated with the amount of data, people, and compute, that's why it's an increasing return to scale. That's why you get the monopolies. Mm-hmm. So that's the bad thing. However, the good thing is, this works in the opposite direction, because a lot of the engines can run locally on relatively limited resources. This allows smaller private sector entities to compete in some part of the space, and therefore provide competition. So you sort of have this, things, pushing in both directions.
Yeah, I think it goes to the direction I was thinking. Okay, thanks.
Ángel, te pediría si le puedes trasladar mi pregunta al profesor. Quería saber si piensas si estamos ante una burbuja de la inteligencia artificial, igual que hemos tenido la burbuja inmobiliaria ahora o la de las .com, y qué puede pasar una vez que pinche.
A bubble, like we were before in other kinds of bubbles, of what might happen once it explodes?
The answer is yes and no. But like I said, nothing. So let's take the company I just mentioned, NVIDIA. So NVIDIA now, if you follow the stock market, has crazy price earnings valuations. So it is pricing in that NVIDIA will end up becoming 10 times more profitable than it is. I think there's no way that will happen. There's a lot of competition in the hardware space coming online. So I certainly think there's a bubble in the AI hardware space. This is NVIDIA. This is multiple trillions of dollars in valuation. So there's certainly a bubble there. But one thing about bubbles is, and I like to go back to the internet bubble around the year 2000. That was certainly a bubble, but was it a bad bubble? I think no. Because out of that, we got Google, we got Apple, we got Amazon, we got all the high-tech companies now. So a lot of things came out of that are positive. So a huge number of investors are chasing after. A lot of people will lose a lot of money on AI. That I'm absolutely certain. There'll be very large losses for individuals and for investors generally. Certainly true. However, I don't think AI as a concept and how AI is transforming the world is going away. Because even if you make no progress with AI technology, imagine you could just freeze the technology today, completely freeze it. You can still just in your mind think of million companies in Spain that could benefit from AI. So even if you do nothing else, there's still enormous low-hanging fruit among private firms in using AI already, and in the public sector. So that doesn't need any speculation. That's just that's a statement of fact. And then if you layer on top of that, there's no indication of a slowdown in the development of AI technology. To my mind means AI will continue to be increasingly used everywhere, for good and for bad. And by the way, when I asked who is the most at risk and who is least at risk, I think the biggest beneficiary is someone like me who's 60 years old about to retire. Because AI will make my retirement comfortable, but not threaten my job. Yeah.
Enrique?
Thanks. I just want to go for a market. What is your vision, position about ethics and the implementation of these new rules in big organizations means cutting jobs, big cutting jobs.
Yeah.
At the moment, we are in the plan of a tool where we have been created for big organizations on top of 100,000 employees around the world. And the question that we have at the moment is because the lack of regulations, we don't have exactly the way to go, because at least we have this kind of something in perception about it's not the moment, because it's not a real regulation about how to make this kind of implementations without this big impact in jobs.
Okay, so you are basically saying two things. So I'm going to ask the more scary and easy part first. Finance is a very competitive industry, and I do not think. I mean, I hear this argument that big organizations are reluctant to fire a large number of people to save money. I don't believe it. I mean, I think that we have seen how big private firms have operated since beginning of time. And that's not really how they operate. There is, of course, collective responsibility there, but if you try to be too responsible, another competitor that is not will end up taking away your market share. So that is not really something I see likely. And a slight twist on the first part is, because I often get my students ask me about this and how will it affect their careers. And I deal with the 21 to 22-year-olds that go on the job market. And if you're in the private sector, you quite possibly might employ one or two of my former students since they end up throughout the private sector. So I'm going to do it in a roundabout way. I was just talking to a very large asset manager in Europe. So this is a person that is a very senior position in one of the largest European banks. And he said basically the following. At the moment when I deal with clients, I have to verify, and these are large clients, I have to verify whether we don't violate the laws in every jurisdiction an investment might touch on. We have to violate the mandate given to the client, which might be ethical or otherwise. So basically at the moment, I have an army of lawyers that have to, when an order comes from the trader selling to the big client, well, does it violate both the contracts and the laws in multiple jurisdictions? So I have an army of lawyers that are multilingual in my basement. I'm just about to fire almost all of them. And he said, in this particular bank, hundreds of lawyers, like I said, multiple hundreds of lawyers. And the reason is, we have trained an AI on reading the local law in all of these jurisdictions, on reading the contracts and reading the mandates. And at the moment, AI responds much, much better than a human being does, immediately and more accurately. And he said, the reason we haven't done it, that we are dealing with the corner cases where there's something weird going on, so it's still be monitored, right? And he had no qualms about firing hundreds of lawyers. So this comes back to what I tell my students. My suggestion is that if a 30-year-old person in 10 years' time or 8 years' time comes up for promotion, and the person competing with them knows less AI than they do, the person knows more AI probably will get a job. This means that the future successful employee in a financial organization, which is what I know, will need to be two things. They will both be domain experts, so expert in whatever you're doing as a specialist in a financial system, and they need to be fairly good at AI. Now think of the human capital consequences. You are demanding much more intelligent people than you're demanding a higher level of human intelligence to be the person than a typical employee now. And then you think of the salary consequences of that. So those people will demand very high salaries. Remember the very high salaries. So therefore, you end up with the social consequences of a career track now open to a fairly intelligent but not super brilliant 22-year-old going in the job market. They can go into finance and they make a decent salary. For a lot of them, that's going to be cut off. And then you can think of the social consequences from that. And then you have to ask yourself, will those people find productive jobs elsewhere, or will they end up going and voting for extremist parties like Marine Le Pen and Vox? That's my long answer. That's my long answer to that question.
¿Alguien más?
So you were saying that the supervisors should use data, or should have data, compute, and experts in data. Right now, actually, if you go to the Bank of Spain or to the CNMV, the financial security supervisors, they're looking for experts right now in data. They have the data, a lot of data inside,
Of course.
and they have money to spend in computing. So if they had those three things to try to avoid this type of crisis here in Spain, what else could we do? Coordination or?
Well, the sort of, I mean, the first thing is just, I think the immediate step is, so I mean, I know this is happening. I mean, I do know that, I mean, I haven't talked to the Bank of Spain, but I've talked to other European central banks, and I do know they understand all of this, right? There's nothing surprising here. They're trying to hire people. But the issue is really, can they overcome the cultural objection of paying someone who's 24-year-old more money than a middle-level manager? It's sort of that sort of problem. Or can you take someone who's 24-year-old into a briefing meeting with the senior people? If you ever worked in a central bank, you know how briefings works, right? basically a junior employee has the idea, there are about 4 layers of filters before it goes to the board. This is how, well, you need to then take the first layer, put it into the top level meeting. So it's a cultural thing. But I think they need to develop local expertise and allow those people to participate in senior meetings. That's just the local that's besides anything, right? So I think that would be my first step. Then, if you think about the data the central bank or the authority generally has and the mandate it has, and of course knowing that every other entity is doing the same thing because every other country has the same problem, well, then you could think about, can I develop local, sort of, can I use this expertise with my local data? And if not, how should I think about outsourcing? So then you just end up with this global, and this discussion is going on. So I mean, I'm sort of simplifying quite a lot, but there are avenues for the authorities to deal with this. And are they, I mean, I spend a fair bit of time talking to them, and I think this is well understood by almost everybody, but they still haven't quite figured out what they want to do, or how to do it. But I think there's an appreciation of the problem. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but this is sort of a rambling response to that.
Imagine you have to take a decision. You have 2 systems. One system is based on AI. It takes all the nitty-gritty and it's been trained in a particular way, maybe with the bias of the language or even the bias of the sources you had to train that. And it's going to produce some regulatory spreadsheet, some regulatory terms. The other one, and this can produce also some mistakes or some biases that are so hidden and also so large to see that you might come to an idea what it meant with a long time lag after you finish seeing that you actually committed a mistake for trying to take decisions that you have to see the balance, whether it was worth it or not. And then you have another system that is principle-based, and there are humans taking decisions on a very broad scale. There are 5 principles, and they take decisions, and they put the type of decisions in several boxes, and then once they reach every box, they kind of take a proxy decision to that. Would that be worse, one than the other, long-term seeing? So would that be, for certain things that are so specific and so detail-oriented, maybe sure, but for broad decision-taking and rule-making, would that be the enforceability of the decisions taken by an AI that can have?
Well, you could actually do the second with AI.
Okay.
Right? There is conceptually no reason why. I mean, there is a design element, engine design element, but there's no reason why you couldn't have an engine optimized for principle-based regulation, and therefore been able to deal with all the nuances that come along with the 5 boxes and putting things into the right place. So you could do the whole thing. So I don't see anything really AI specific in this split. You're really just talking about rules versus discretion, right?
Purely in a mechanistic way that takes decision based on a specific training, but also conceals some biases and problems that you are just putting on top of the table. And the other one, obviously, human-based with less accuracy and all that stuff. But my point is, whether the trade-off in one system would be overshadowing the other one.
Well,
for sure, I'm saying.
The boundary, the problem boundary, in my mind, comes from the importance of the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So really, so the way to think about this is, so let's say, hypothetically, right, you have let's take consumer protection regulation in banking, right, or finance generally, right. It's fairly, I mean, there are principles involved, and new products come along, but you have the authorities have a fairly good idea of which bucket to put it into. You can replicate a whole system with AI today quite effectively.
Yeah.
So you could take sort of the whole host of large number of small decisions, and you can replicate both the principle-based second one and also the first mechanical one, or hybrid of the two, or some combination. It's a much better AI system. The problem is really when you start getting to more important problems where you have less data and the cost of mistakes is higher, but that's when AI is most likely to come to the wrong conclusion. So
I understand.
so I would sort of for that problem, I would put that continuum onto the problem to think
And
about.
scaling what is more important. Okay,
Yeah.
just wanted to see
Yeah,
from your point of view,
this is
what
how
would you be faring? That's all I wanted to know.
¿Alguien más? Pues muchas gracias a todos. Seguiremos dándole vueltas al tema.